There's something unsettling about being deep in the woods. It's not just the silence, but the kind of silence that feels aware. David and Lucas had been hunting in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana every October for 6 straight years. A ritual born from tradition and reinforced by solitude. These weren't amateur outdoorsmen. They had grown up in the wilderness, tracking elk, field dressing deer, reading terrain like others read maps. But on their 7th trip, something changed. It started with a wrong turn. They had set out early that morning, following an old game trail that looped past a frozen creek. But sometime before noon, David realized they were walking a direction they'd never seen before. The compass spun slightly, but not enough to cause panic. Still, the landscape looked unfamiliar. Trees here were darker, denser, closer together than they should be. Lucas brushed it off. "We'll circle back," he said. "Worst comes to worst, we just camp early." But the feeling of being watched had already set in. It began subtly, like the pressure of unseen eyes on the back of the neck. You tell yourself it's nothing. The breeze, a squirrel, maybe the sun playing tricks through the branches. But the weight of that gaze doesn't go away. If anything, it deepens. By evening, the temperature dropped. Shadows spilled through the trees like ink, and Lucas set up camp while David checked their trail cam. They had mounted it near a natural choke point, where elk usually moved through, and expected to catch some movement. But the footage was off. The camera had triggered repeatedly around 2:17 a.m. the night before. Not with animals. Not with anything familiar. Every clip was empty. Same angle. Same still frame. But every 30 seconds the shadows shifted. Just slightly. It was like something was standing there just out of frame, casting a shadow that didn't belong. The edges were wrong. Longer than a man's. Thin. Twitching. Not fluid like an animal's movement. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lucas pointed to the tree line. "You see that?" At first, David thought he meant a deer, but there were no eyeshine, no shape, just the outline of the tree line, and something darker standing between the trees. Motionless. "It's not moving. It hasn't blinked," David whispered. They turned their lights on it. It vanished instantly. No rustling, no retreating steps. Just gone. They slept lightly that night. But David couldn't ignore the feeling. Like something had taken interest. Something that understood hesitation. That studied them before approaching. By the next morning, their gear had been disturbed. Nothing taken. Just moved. The camp chairs were facing different directions. The firewood they stacked was now arranged into a perfect circle. A ring, around where they'd slept. Lucas wanted to leave. They packed quickly, but the way back had changed. Trees weren't where they'd been. Paths were unfamiliar. Even the moss on the trees was reversed. That's when they saw it again. At first, it looked like a branch. Long, angular. But it was standing. Too still. Too vertical. And the longer they looked, the more it looked back. It wasn't a shape you could focus on. Every time they stared directly at it, it seemed to dissolve. But from the corner of the eye, it was there. Tall. Watching. Lucas raised his rifle. But something inside David told him, don't move. He didn't know why. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. That kind of raw, primal alarm that exists before language. Before thought. The figure didn't chase them. It didn't need to. It was always ahead. Every direction they turned, it reappeared at the edge of the tree line, as if it was hurting them. The deeper they ran, the more the forest began to change. The light dimmed, not from the sky, but like something was absorbing it. The air felt dense, almost wet. Lucas stumbled and cut his leg. The blood wasn't red. It was black in the light. They stopped near a clearing. Open space. No tree cover. And for a moment, they thought they were safe. Until the silence broke. Not by sound. By absence. Birds stopped chirping. No wind. No rustling. And then a sound. Low. Clicking. Like two stones tapping together. Rhythmically. It came from behind. Then from the left. Then the right. Surrounding them. Lucas whispered, "It's copying us." David realized what he meant. The clicking matched their steps. Their breaths. Every time they moved, it echoed them. Half a second late. Not a creature. Not an animal. Something pretending to be. That's when they ran. Not out of fear. Out of the sudden, desperate realization that they'd been part of the game. Something intelligent. Something old. They didn't remember how they got back. David said he blacked out. Lucas claimed they walked for hours, but the sun hadn't moved. When they finally reached their truck, it was dusk. Everything looked normal, but back home, things didn't return to normal. David couldn't sleep. Lucas started keeping knives in every room. They both reported the same dream. Standing in the forest. Alone. Looking at something just beyond the trees. A shape that watched. That waited. Not malevolent. Not hungry. Just curious. Like a child studying ants. And always the last thing in the dream was that same sound. Click. 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 They're watching from everywhere. Subscribe before it's too late. And tell me, where are you watching from? They've been hunting this stretch of forest for years. Remote. Overgrown. The kind of place where cell service drops out the second you step off the road. A perfect pocket of wilderness. It was supposed to be a 2-day hunt. Just Tyler and his cousin Jack, both experienced, both confident. They tracked deer signs deep into the hills and made camp off an old trail they'd used before. But on the second morning, Tyler noticed something strange. About 2 miles northeast of their camp, where they'd never been before, he spotted a narrow path barely wider than a deer trail. It was almost hidden under the underbrush, as if it hadn't been walked in years. But there were impressions. Not boots, not hooves, just prints. Too smooth to be animal, too narrow to be human. Out of curiosity, or something else, Tyler followed it. It twisted for nearly a mile through thick woods, where the canopy blacked out the sky. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of his boots and his breath fogging the morning air. Then the trail widened, opened into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. And there it was, a cabin, old, hand-built, cedar logs gone gray, a stone chimney split down the side, windows boarded up with mismatched planks, no visible path to or from it, no tire tracks, no trail cameras, just a structure buried in the woods like it had grown from the ground. Tyler didn't go inside. Not that day. He circled it, quietly, listening. He knocked once. No answer. He figured it was abandoned. Maybe a trapper's shelter from decades ago. But something unsettled him. How it didn't smell like the forest. It smelled wrong, like earth and ash and something wet that had been inside too long. He returned to camp, mentioned it to Jack. Jack laughed it off. Old hunter's cabin. Could be worth checking. Tyler didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, they went together. Same trail. Same silence. But when they got to the clearing, it had changed. The cabin was still there. But now, the front door was open. Just a few inches. Like it had been expecting them. They called out. Nothing. Jack stepped in first, rifle ready. Tyler followed. It was dim inside, smelled of mildew, and something iron-sweet beneath it. The furniture was primitive. A wood stove, a cot, a broken rocking chair, walls etched with what looked like tally marks, hundreds of them. No electricity, no plumbing. But the strangest part? There was no dust. Anywhere. Tyler brushed his fingers across a shelf. Clean. The stove was cold, but the ash inside was fresh, maybe a day old. Someone had used it. Recently. Then Jack found it. A journal. Leather-bound. Pages rotted around the edges, but the ink was sharp. The entry started in 1968, ended sometime in the early 80s. All written in the same hand. Comment first. Observations about the land. Hunting logs. Then slowly, they unraveled. I hear them again. Outside the walls. I know they can't come in. Not while the door's sealed. It mimicked my brother's voice today. Told me to step outside. I nearly did. They hate the tally marks. I carve one for every night they don't get in. If someone finds this, don't open the door after dark. Tyler's mouth went dry. They both looked at the door, still ajar. It didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like a warning. They left. Quickly. Didn't speak until they were halfway back to camp. Jack joked, tried to shake the tension. Some loony off-grid survivalist. Lived too long alone. But that night, strange sounds surrounded their camp. Not animals. Not wind. Something else. Slow dragging steps. Then sharp, sudden stillness. Like something was waiting, listening. At 3:12 a.m., Jack woke Tyler. There's someone out there, he whispered. He'd seen a silhouette. Tall. Still. Just beyond the tree lean. Tyler peeked. No movement. Just that feeling of being watched. Like eyes were pressing in through the blackness. Then came the sound. A voice. Jack's voice. But it was coming from the woods. Calling to Tyler. Hey, D, come help me with something. But Jack was right next to him. Frozen. Pale. They didn't sleep. At dawn, they packed. Fussed. Abandoned half their gear. As they hiked back toward the main trail, Tyler realized they'd gotten turned around. Somehow, they were circling back toward the cabin. But the clearing was different now. There were two cabins, side by side, identical. Same logs, same windows, same open door. Neither of them spoke. Tyler pulled out his GPS dead screen. Jack's compass spun in slow, meaningless circles. And then, the tally marks. They were on the trees now, carved fresh, deep, hundreds of them, all leading away from the cabins in branching paths like veins. That's when they heard footsteps. Close. Too close. But when they turned, there was nothing. Then came another voice. A whisper, no louder than the wind. Seal the door, before dark. They ran. Not in panic, in fear. A quiet, pressing dread. The kind that tells you you're not supposed to be here. They finally found the road near sunset. When they looked back, the woods behind them looked darker. Like it was folding in. Jack never hunted again. Tyler tried to explain. Tried to convince himself it was some elaborate illusion. A trick of isolation. He tried to look up the cabin, the journal, any records of someone living there. But there was nothing. No maps show a clearing at that location. No property deeds. No disappearances. The area isn't even supposed to be accessible, state-owned land under conservation since the 60s. And here's the part that chills him even now. A month later, he went back. Alone. Just to prove to himself it was real. The trail wasn't there. He bushwhacked in the direction he remembered. Found nothing. But just as he turned to leave, he saw something nailed to a tree near where the clearing should have been. It was a page. Torn. Yellowed. The same handwriting from the journal. 7 words, scrawled in black ink. You opened the door. They saw you. This story isn't over yet. Hit subscribe to follow the shadows. They were experienced hunters, not amateurs, not thrill seekers with rifles. They were seasoned, 2 cousins, Tyler and Mason, who'd been hunting in the dense backwoods of Arkansas every fall since they were teenagers. But last November, something was different. They camped out near the Ouachita Mountains, far from any roads, far from any noise. Just the endless thickets of pine and fog. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. On their second night, just before midnight, they heard movement near their camp. Slow, heavy footsteps. Not the rustling of a deer, not the light skitter of raccoons. These were deliberate, measured. Tyler called out, assuming it was another hunter passing through. No reply. The footsteps stopped, and then something let out a low, guttural moan. Not quite animal, not quite human. Both men froze. Mason flicked off the lantern. Tyler quietly chambered round. They waited. Nothing. Just silence. But when they checked the area the next morning, they found deep footprints circling their camp. Barefoot, human-shaped, but too long, too narrow, as if the thing had too many joints in its feet. They followed the tracks for half a mile, but they simply stopped. Not faded, not buried, just stopped. In the middle of the brush, like the creature had vanished into thin air. That should have been enough to leave. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when men think they understand the forest. They stayed. On the third night, just after dusk, Mason spotted movement through the trees. It was upright. At first glance, human. But it was gaunt, tall, easily 7 feet and wrong. Its arms were too long. Its gait was jerky, stilted like it wasn't used to walking. They raised their rifles and called out. It didn't run. It didn't even flinch. It stared at them, the eyes too wide. No whites, just pale yellow irises glowing softly in the dark. They fired. Tyler took the first shot, dead center. Mason followed. The thing staggered just a bit, then straightened. It didn't fall. It didn't bleed. It simply turned and walked away. Not a sprint, not a stumble, just a slow walk like nothing had happened. When they checked the spot, there was no blood, no tissue, no evidence it had been hit at all. But the bark behind it, where the bullet should have gone through, was untouched, as if the rounds vanished midair. They didn't sleep that night. They kept the fire blazing until dawn, weapons close, nerves shattered. At sunrise, Mason noticed something just outside camp. A gift. A deer head, fresh but oddly clean. No body, no blood trail, just the head, propped on a flat stone facing their tent. Its eyes had been gouged out. That's when they left. No potbugs, no campfire-doused. Just grabbed their gear and left. But the story doesn't end there, because something followed them. Tyler would later admit to hearing whispers in the days after they returned home, in the static of his truck radio, in the woods behind his house. Always the same faint phrase. Didn't bleed. Mason? He lasted a week before checking himself into a hospital. Paranoia, nightmares, shadows at the foot of his bed. He claimed it was watching him through the vents. And one night, he tore every air duct out of his house trying to find it. They weren't the first ones to see it either. A retired ranger, who patrolled that same area for over 20 years, once told a researcher he saw something tall, gray, and bloodless after shooting at what he thought was a wounded elk. When asked why he never went back to the Ouachita region, he just said, "You can't kill what was never alive." But what was it? Some think it was a Wendigo, a twisted spirit from Algonquian folklore, known to mimic human form and walk the woods in hunger. But Wendigos don't vanish into thin air. Others suggest it was a tulpa, a thought form, something that exists only because someone believes in it hard enough. But this thing left footprints, physical ones. A less mystical theory suggests they encountered an ultra-terrestrial, not alien in the UFO sense, but a being that lives in this world between layers of reality. It explains the vanishing tracks, the bullets that passed through it, and why it left a gift, a show of dominance, a warning, something primal and intelligent. Some say that region of the Ouachita Mountains has thin spots, areas where the fabric of our world wears down, and something else presses through. And if that's true, the entity Tyler and Mason saw wasn't hunting. It was waiting, watching them long before they noticed it. And when they opened fire, didn't fight back, because it wanted them to know, you can shoot at it, but you can't hurt it. You can scream at it, but it won't respond, because it doesn't bleed, because it isn't meant to. And if you ever wander off trail in those woods, you might see it too, standing there, just beyond the tree line. Tall, still, waiting for you to fire, so it can show you what Tyler and Mason learned too late. You know that moment in the dead of night, when the woods feel too quiet. That's when something's watching. Back in 2017, two cousins, Daniel and Marcus, set out for a late-season deer hunt in northern Idaho. It wasn't their first time camping in the wilderness, but it would be their last together. Not because of tragedy in the traditional sense, but because of something that broke their understanding of reality. They picked a familiar stretch of forest near a rocky ridge they had hunted before, just a few miles off a dirt access road. No cell service, no lights, just miles of pine and dead silence after dark. The first day was uneventful. Some signs of animal movement, a few snapped twigs, nothing alarming. That night, they set up camp and lit a fire. They were alone. At least, that's what they believed. Around 11:30 p.m., Marcus went to relieve himself behind the tent, while Daniel stayed behind by the fire, poking at embers. Then, Marcus called out quietly, "Do you see that?" Daniel turned. Far off, just beyond the ridge where the woods thickened, there was a faint glow. Faint, but unmistakable. A second campfire. At first, they assumed someone else had set up nearby, but they'd seen no other vehicles, no other signs of life. And more unsettling, that fire hadn't been there moments ago. They watched for 15, maybe 20 minutes. No shadows moved around it. No flicker of figures passing in front. No voices. Just an eerie, isolated glow, like a candlelit warning. Still, they weren't frightened. Not yet. They went to sleep eventually, deciding not to approach the second camp. But something was wrong with the air that night. Daniel described it later as pressurized, like the woods were holding their breath. Then, at 3:13 a.m., Both cousins were jolted awake. The fire, the second one, was closer. Much closer. It was now maybe 50 yards from their tent. Still silent. Still unattended. But brighter. Too bright. This time, Daniel grabbed his scope and looked through it. What he saw changed the tone of their entire trip. There was a fire, yes, but the logs weren't burning. They weren't even charring. The flames flickered, artificial, almost too clean, like a projection. But the logs beneath them were untouched. No crackle, no smoke, just perfect dancing flames. Then, something moved, not around the fire, inside it. A silhouette passed through the flames, undistorted. The figure looked human, but too tall. The limbs were long, the torso narrow, and as it stepped through the flames, its face, or what should have been a face, was a smooth, pale blur. No mouth, no eyes. It didn't look at them, not directly, but it turned toward their tent, and stood still. Neither cousin moved for over 5 minutes. Frozen in the dark. The firelight cast no shadows. It just glowed, quietly, malevolently. Then, without warning, the figure stepped backward, back into the woods, and the fire went out instantly. Gone. No embers. No lingering glow. Just a sudden return to blackness. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the air felt wrong. The forest seemed altered. The birdsong was off. Too rhythmic. Too rehearsed. They packed up quickly. But curiosity, as always, lingers. Marcus insisted they check the area where the second fire had been. They hiked the short distance to the clearing and found the spot. There were no burn marks, no ash, no footprints. But what they did find, a perfectly circular depression in the dirt, 8 feet across, as if something heavy had hovered just above the forest floor. The pine needles surrounding it were undisturbed, but in the center of the circle was a single object, a melted, warped flashlight, one neither of them recognized. It was covered in a thin film, like oil, and smelled faintly of sulfur. Daniel reached down to touch it, but Marcus stopped him, and just as they turned to leave, they both heard it. The unmistakable crackle of fire. Not behind them, not far off, but beneath their feet, like embers just under the earth. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They walked, slowly, deliberately, never turning around. Once they reached the trailhead, Daniel looked back, and he saw it, a flicker of firelight between the trees, in a perfect circle. Since that day, neither cousin has returned to that part of the forest. But the story didn't end there. 2 years later, Daniel met a ranger at a local bar who claimed to patrol that region. When Daniel casually mentioned the old ridge trail, the ranger's face fell. He said one thing before finishing his drink and leaving the bar without another word. We stopped mapping that area back in the 90s. Too many missing persons. Fires where there shouldn't be fires. Sometimes you see 2 campfires in the woods. One is yours. He paused. The other one isn't. No one knows what that second fire was. A hallucination? A mirrored reality? Something testing boundaries? But those who've encountered it all report the same strange after effect. Silence. Not around them. Inside them. Like something was taken. As if the second fire burned more than wood. It burned memory. And perhaps identity. Whatever appeared in that forest wasn't a man, wasn't a hiker, and wasn't a ghost. It was something that could imitate light and walk through fire. And every so often, it still appears. A second campfire, quietly glowing in the dark, waiting for someone to come closer and sit. Thanks for watching. Comment where you're from. I want to see how far the darkness has spread. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror. It was supposed to be a simple hunt. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just me, my rifle, and the familiar scent of pine and frostbite in the early November air. I've been tracking a white-tailed buck for nearly an hour through the Appalachian woods. It was massive, at least a 10-pointer, judging by the prints and scat. The trail was fresh, leading away from the clearing and winding deep into territory I hadn't scouted before. The deeper I followed, the quieter the forest became. At first, I chalked it up to natural instinct, animals going still when a predator moves through. But it wasn't just birds or squirrels falling silent. The entire forest felt empty, as if it were holding its breath. At about 2 miles in, the trail suddenly veered downhill into a narrow gully, where the trees grew older and the bark warped like twisted faces. I noticed something odd. The deer prints started to stagger. They weren't uniform anymore. One was deep, the next shallow, almost like the animal had started limping. Then the hooves split. The next few tracks had an unnatural width to them, like something imitating a deer but getting the details wrong. Still, I pressed on, curiosity overriding my better judgment. Eventually, I came across a natural clearing, a perfect circle devoid of leaves, as if swept clean by invisible hands. In the center stood an old stone altar, covered in moss and carved with unfamiliar symbols. Arranged around it were animal bones, some deer, some not. I could make out small skulls, delicate and human-shaped, but far too small for any adult. I froze, not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. The forest was still. No wind, no movement. Even the distant rustle of branches had stopped. That's when I realized something impossible. There were no more deer tracks. They just ended. Right there, 5 feet from the altar. I should have left. Every fiber of my being screamed to turn back. But then I saw it. Hanging from one of the nearby trees was what looked like a deer's head, but it wasn't mounted. It was bound with twine, strung up like an offering, and painted with black markings. Its eyes were still in the sockets, wide open, not dried out, not decayed. Fresh, too fresh. I raised my rifle and backed away slowly, my boots crunching the frost. That's when the wind returned, or at least I thought it was the wind. It started low, a moan carried on the air. Long, drawn out. Not human, not animal either. It reverberated through the trees like it came from below the ground. Then the whispering started. Not loud, not aggressive, just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. But I could feel it brushing against my ears, like breath from something standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I closed my eyes, took one slow breath, and stepped backward again. That's when I heard the snap. Not from me. Not a twig underfoot. It came from behind the altar. Something had stepped out from behind it. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. But the deer's head was now facing me. It hadn't been before. And now its mouth was open. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. Branches sliced my arms, thorns tore my jeans, but I didn't stop. The whispering grew louder, like a chorus building toward a crescendo. Some words started to form. I couldn't recognize the language, but it felt old, like it had never been meant for human ears. Somewhere in the chaos, I dropped my rifle. I don't even remember it falling. I didn't care. My only goal was to get out. When I finally stumbled back into familiar territory, back onto the path I had left an hour earlier, the forest snapped back to life. Birds chirped. A squirrel darted across the trail. The wind returned, light and unassuming, as if mocking me. But the silence inside me remained. I got home just after dark, covered in blood, not mine, and completely shaken. I tried to sleep that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. Not physically, but spiritually, like a scent it couldn't wash off. That's when I noticed the scratches. Not on me, on my front door. 5 long gouges across the wood, just above the handle. Deep enough to expose the inner grain. Too high up for an animal. I live alone. No one else has the key. The next day, I returned to the spot with 2 park rangers. I showed them where I'd gone, described the clearing, the altar, everything. But when we got there was nothing. The clearing was gone. In its place was a normal stretch of trees and underbrush. The altar? Gone. The bones? Vanished. Even the deer tracks had disappeared. Every sign of what I'd experienced had been swallowed by the forest. One of the rangers looked at me like I was losing it. The other didn't say a word the entire way back. But as we reached my truck, he leaned in and said something that chilled me more than anything else that day. You're lucky. Most folks who stumble into those places don't find their way back. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and walked away. That night, I burned my hunting clothes. Every piece. Boots, gloves, all of it. I haven't stepped foot in those woods since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That same low moan, carried on the wind. And every now and then, I find fresh dirt on my front steps. Like something walked up and just stood there, waiting, watching, remembering. Deep down, I know I wasn't supposed to leave that clearing. Whatever lives out there in those woods, whatever ritual I interrupted, it knows my name now, and it's just waiting for me to come back. We always talked about doing it, heading out into the wild. Just the two of us, no distractions, no noise. Just the woods, our gear, and the thrill of tracking something real. My friend Caleb was the kind of guy who could read a trail like a book. He grew up hunting with his grandfather out in northern Idaho. I trusted him more than anyone when it came to the outdoors. So when he said he wanted to do a solo hunt that fall, I didn't think much of it. He had done them before, and though I always gave him a hard time about going alone, I knew better than to try and stop him. This time, though, something felt different. It was early October when he left. I helped him load his truck. Rifle, rations, flares, GPS beacon. Everything he'd need. The last thing he said before pulling out of my driveway was, "If I'm not back by next Sunday, assume I found Bigfoot and I'm living off-grid." He didn't come back Sunday. At first, I assumed he was just taking his time. But by Tuesday, I was getting texts from his sister and calls from his mom. I drove up to the trailhead myself on Wednesday, parked in the same place he had shown me on the map, and started walking. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no fresh tire tracks near the trailhead, no recent boot prints. It was as if Caleb had never been there at all. But I knew he had. He'd even posted a photo to his private Instagram story the day he left. Dense trees, early morning fog, a caption that read, "Heaven." I tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. The search and rescue team went out 2 days later. They found his camp about 5 miles off trail. Tents still up, supplies untouched, even his firewood stacked neatly beside a cold pit. But no sign of him. No blood. No straged. No animal activity. Just gone. But the strangest part? His rifle was still there. Every hunter knows you never leave your weapon behind. It was laid out on top of his sleeping bag, like it had been placed there intentionally, as if he had come back from somewhere, and then decided he didn't need it anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed around 3:12 a.m. The screen lit up, "Caleb." I nearly dropped it. I answered immediately, but there was nothing. Just wind. No voice. No static. Just long, dragging wind that sounded almost like breathing. Then the call ended. I checked the call log. It lasted 27 seconds. I tried calling back, straight to voicemail again. The next day, I gave his number to the police. They said the signal had pinged from inside the forest, nearly 8 miles from his last known camp. That didn't make sense. There were no roads out there. And even if he had walked that far, how was he charging his phone? That night, I got another call. Same thing. Wind. Then what sounded like footsteps crunching leaves. Very slow. Deliberate. But it was subtle, like whoever was holding the phone didn't want to be heard. Then a voice. Low. Dry. Almost hoarse. "Help." I froze. "Caleb," I asked. But there was no answer. Just more wind. Then silence. I didn't sleep again for the next 3 days. The police eventually stopped investigating. No signs of foul play. No proof he hadn't just gotten lost. But I kept getting calls. Every time it was the same wind, movement, that low, rasping voice. Sometimes I heard other sounds too. Metal clinking like gear buckles. A dragging sound. Once I heard what sounded like humming, but in reverse. Like someone playing a music box backwards. One night, I picked up and said nothing. Just listened. At 14 seconds in, I heard my name. Not my name exactly. Not the way Caleb said it. It was mispronounced, as if someone had heard it once and was trying to copy it phonetically. It came again, slower, elongated. "Carol." My skin went cold. That voice wasn't his. It was close. Too close. But not quite right. There was something off about it, like it was pushing through the wrong vocal cords. Like it remembered how to sound human, but had forgotten how to be one. At the 23-second mark, it repeated, "Carl, come out." That was the first time I blocked the number. But it didn't stop. The calls kept coming, from unknown numbers now. Always around 3 a.m. Always the same wind. The same distorted voice. Sometimes begging. Sometimes mimicking things I'd said to Caleb months ago. Once, I heard it whisper, "I know where you sleep." I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. I kept thinking about the rifle. How it was left behind. Almost like an offering. A trade. Or maybe a message. Caleb wasn't armed when he vanished. Was it his choice? Or did he leave it because whatever he encountered didn't need to fear it? I started looking into similar disappearances, hunting forums, subreddits, old blogs from retired game wardens. I found a disturbing pattern. Solo hunters going missing in the same region of forest. Same time of year. Same eerily untouched campsites. And sometimes weird voicemails or calls or sightings of someone walking near the tree line, barefoot, unarmed, but wearing the same gear as the missing person. One story stuck with me. A man said he saw his brother near their hunting cabin 2 weeks after his body was presumed lost. He looked fine, clean, unharmed. But when the man called out his brother's name, the figure turned and smiled, and then ran on all fours into the trees. The man refused to go near that cabin again. It's been a year now. The calls have slowed. I moved across the country, changed my number. But some nights, when it's cold, when the wind's just right, I dream about it. About picking up my phone. About hearing that voice again. And in the dream, it always says the same thing. Carl, I found something in the woods. I want to show you. It's beautiful. And just before I wake up, it laughs. But the sound is exactly like my own voice. There were 4 of us that year, me, my brother Wes, and our 2 longtime hunting buddies, Carter and Jonah. It was late October, prime hunting season, and we had driven 6 hours into a part of Idaho that didn't even show up clearly on GPS unless you downloaded the maps offline. The area was all thick pine, elevation fog, and that particular silence that only exists far from civilization. We'd camped there before, just once, but something about this trip felt different from the moment we got out of the truck. The air wasn't just cold. It was still, heavy, like it was holding its breath. I remember Wes joked that the woods were waiting. It sounded dumb at the time, but that stuck with me. We set up camp near a small clearing close to a stream and went out in pairs for the afternoon. Nothing strange happened until the next morning. That's when we saw the footprints. Not animal tracks, not boot prints, bare feet, human, adult-sized. At first, we thought it was just a lost hiker. They led out of the woods and across the damp grass near the camp, just visible in the frost. No one admitted to walking around barefoot, and no one had even left their tent that night. The prints weren't stumbling or panicked like you'd expect if someone was lost or in trouble. They were straight, deliberate, and they didn't circle the camp. They went past it, heading back into the forest. Carter was the first to suggest we follow them, just to see where they led. I should have said no. We all should have. But none of us wanted to look like the coward. So we grabbed our rifles, left a mark at camp, and started tracking. The prints stayed consistent. Deep heel strikes, ball of the foot, no that I've marks. Whoever made them was walking confidently, unhurried. That was the first weird part. The second came an hour in, when the prints passed through a narrow gap between boulders that none of us could fit through with our gear on. We had to slide our rifles off and edge sideways. But the prints didn't break stride. They kept going. Smooth. Effortless. That's when Carter joked, maybe it's not even a person. He laughed. No one else did. Another hour. The forest got denser. Stranger. The trees didn't feel right. Some were scorched black at the base. Others had carvings, symbols none of us recognized. Jonah said they looked Native American, but they didn't match anything I'd ever seen in history books. Eventually, the prints crossed a shallow creek, and that's when we noticed something was off. There were no return prints, just a single set moving forward. Always forward. We should have turned back. But the strange thing is it didn't even occur to me to leave. None of us said it out loud, but I could feel it like the path had pulled us in, and now we were on it whether we liked it or not. 2 more hours. We weren't talking anymore. The woods were dead silent. No birds. No roostle. Even the wind was gone. Bara. Human. But they were fresh. And they were coming from our direction. Toward us. Only we hadn't gone that way yet. They looked exactly like the ones we'd followed. Same spacing. Same pattern. But they were facing us now. Not away. Jonah whispered. Those weren't there before. He was right. Something had circled us. We started back the way we came, fast. Faster than we should have with rifles slung on our shoulders. I kept looking behind us, expecting to see someone. Or something. But we never did. The forest had swallowed itself again. Only, The trail wasn't right anymore. The trees looked wrong. The carvings were different. The scorched trunks were gone. And the prints we'd been following, they were still there. But now there were two sets. One ahead, one behind. Ours, but mirrored. At first we thought maybe we'd looped. But Jonah pointed out we hadn't turned. Not once. No bends. Just straight. Always forward. That's when Wes said it. This isn't the same forest. It sounded insane. But the silence, the sky, the trees, they all fell off, like a dream where everything looks real until you blink too long. We didn't stop again. We just kept walking, running. The trail didn't end. The sun didn't move. Hours passed, but it stayed the same. Gray sky, same cold light, same forest. At some point, Carter dropped his pack. Said it was too heavy. Wes started mumbling to himself. Jonah stopped responding to us altogether. And then, without warning, we were back at camp. Only the fire was out. The tents were shredded. And next to the burned-out logs, there were 4 sets of bare footprints, leading out, back into the woods. They were 3 hours into their hike when David first noticed a man in camouflage standing perfectly still between 2 trees. It wasn't unusual to see other hunters in this part of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, especially during rifle season, but something about the man's stillness was wrong. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't moving, just standing. At first, David assumed the guy was watching a deer or something, but when he glanced back a second time, the man hadn't moved a muscle. It was like someone had cut a person-shaped hole into the forest and left it there. David nudged his friend Kyle, whispering, "You see him?" Kyle scanned the tree lean. "Ooh, that guy in the camo." Kyle squinted for a second longer. "There's no one there." That was the first red flag. David blinked and looked back. The man was gone. Now, this wasn't David's first time in the woods. He was an experienced hunter, quiet, observant, and not the type to spook easily. But he knew what he saw, and what unsettled him the most wasn't just that the man disappeared. It was how completely he disappeared. No sound, no crunch of leaves, no shift of branches. One second he was there, and the next he wasn't. They chalked it up to nerves. Maybe it was just another hunter heading in the opposite direction. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But as they pressed deeper into the wilderness, the sense of being watched never quite left them. Then came the second encounter. They were setting up camp for the night, a small clearing near a low ridge. The sun was dipping below the treetops, and the woods were turning that deep, golden black that makes everything feel just a little more ancient. That's when they heard it, branches breaking. Heavy, deliberate. At first, they assumed it was a bear. But bears don't walk in straight lines. This was pacing. Slow, calculated, like someone circling them. David grabbed his flashlight and swept the beam through the trees. And there he was again. Same man, same camo. This time, closer. David shouted, "Hey, you all right?" The man didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even blink. And once again, when the light hit a nearby tree and then swung back, he was gone. Kyle was pale. That wasn't a person. "What do you mean?" "There was no face, dude." It had no face. At first, David thought Kyle was just shaken. But as the night wore on, their radios kept crackling with static. Not interference, whispers. Words they couldn't quite make out. Almost like someone tried to speak just beneath the range of hearing. The whispers always came after silence. Never during the usual sounds of the forest. It was as if something waited until everything else went still before trying to speak. And then the prints. The next morning, they found boot prints surrounding their tent. Not fresh ones. Dried. Cracked. Like they'd been there long before the ground had even hardened. But here's the thing. Those prints didn't lead to the camp. They led away from it. As if someone or something had been inside the circle while they slept and then walked off into the woods. And whoever it was wore military-style boots. Now, this is where the story takes a sharp turn into something more chilling than just a trespasser. David's cousin, who lived about 40 minutes from the trailhead, stopped by a few days later. He brought with him a manila folder full of clippings. Back in 1997, there was a military training accident in that area. A small group of National Guard members went missing during a survival simulation, never found. The official reports claimed equipment malfunction, and the search was called off after 10 days. One of the missing men? A sharpshooter named Sergeant Royce Lang. His last known outfit? Woodland camo and black boots. His last recorded message during the simulation? They're not trees. They're watching us. The message was dismissed as hallucination due to sleep deprivation. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. David found a trail cam video from that same trip. Just before the battery dies, there's a 5-second clip. The timestamp is corrupted, but the footage shows a man, vague, humanoid, clad in camo, standing motionless in the brush, until he turns. It started just before sunrise. That liminal hour when the forest is still cloaked in sleep, when the cold air hangs heavy and the trees feel like they're holding their breath. We were camped about 12 miles into the Bitterroot Mountains. 3 experienced hunters, all seasoned, all cautious. We'd hunted these woods before. We knew the paths, the signs, the sounds, especially the sounds. So when we heard the elk call that morning, long, high-pitched, echoing across the ridgeline, we immediately perked up. It was perfect. Too perfect. Elk don't usually call that early unless they're startled or asserting dominance. This was neither. It had a rhythm to it, spaced out with mechanical precision, almost like someone was playing it on a loop. We paused, exchanging glances. Then it came again, closer this time. Now, anyone who hunts knows that mimicking elk calls isn't uncommon. Hunters use bugle tubes, diaphragms, tools designed to lure elk into shooting range. But the tone of this call wasn't natural. It had this wet rasp at the end, like it was being forced out of something that didn't have the throat for it. Still, curiosity and the possibility of a bull elk got the better of us. We loaded up, radioed in our plans, and headed toward the sound. The first red flag was how quiet everything became. No wind, no birds. Even the squirrels had gone still. Just the crunch of frost beneath our boots and that increasingly artificial elk call leading us deeper into a part of the forest none of us had ever dared to explore. That's when things began to change. We started seeing signs, but not elk signs. Strange tracks in the soil. Hoof prints, yes, but not paired evenly like an elk. These were erratic, almost like something was walking upright, dragging one foot. Tree trunks had deep gouges, far too high for bears. The sap still oozed from the wounds, sticky and black like tar. Around them, clumps of fur, coarse, gray-brown, unfamiliar. Then we came across the first carcass. Not an elk, a fox, torn apart but not eaten, intestines placed neatly beside it in a spiral pattern. It was arranged. We almost turned back then, but the call sounded again. Now, so close it seemed to be just beyond the next ridge. This time, it was followed by a second sound. A low, rattling grunt. It didn't match anything we knew. Not bear, not moose. It sounded like bones being ground in a throat. Still, something compelled us forward. It felt less like we were hunting and more like we were being led. We crested the ridge and found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by pine. Dead center was what looked like an elk. Its back to us, standing perfectly still. But there was something off. Its body was too elongated, its legs too thin, and its head wasn't right. It looked more like a mask, flat, featureless, almost like it had been placed on a human-sized figure. Before we could move, it let out another call, but this time we heard it twice. Once from a figure in front of us, and once from somewhere behind. We turned sharply, rifles raised, but nothing was there. When we looked back, the elk thing was gone. No rustling, no sound, just empty snow and silence. We were done. We started heading back fast, but the forest had changed. Landmarks we knew were missing. Paths turned to gnarled thickets. And worst of all, the elk calls were following us. Sometimes behind, sometimes to our left, sometimes right beside us. The tone shifted, higher-pitched, frantic, like whatever was making them was excited, like it was getting closer. Then we heard a third voice. Not an elk, not an animal. It was one of us. Over here, a perfect mimic of Connor's voice, our third hunter, who had split off earlier. Only, Connor was with me, right beside me, pale as a ghost. Run, he said. So we did. Branches slashed at our faces. Our gear got caught, but we didn't stop. Behind us, the calls turned into laughter. Not human, not even joyful, just dry, wheezing mimicry of the sound a human might make while trying to laugh. We stumbled into our camp about 40 minutes later, but had been disturbed. Our tents were gone, the fire pit smashed, and on a nearby tree, we found something that made my stomach drop. A strip of deer hide nailed to the bark. On it, scrawled in what looked like blood, were 2 words. Call back. We didn't sleep that night. Come dawn, we hiked back to the truck in silence. And as we drove down the gravel path away from the forest, my radio, dead for hours, crackled to life. It was the L call, distorted, slowed down. Then came my voice. Over here. Thanks for watching. Comment where you're from. I want to see how far the darkness has spread. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror. They say the wilderness has its own rules. When you're out there alone, truly alone, something ancient watches you. You might not see it, you might not hear it, but it's there, waiting for you to forget that you're a guest and that not everything in the woods is meant to be found. This story comes from a man named Cole, a seasoned hunter from Oregon. He'd been on dozens of solo trips before, comfortable in the backcountry, used to sleeping under the stars with nothing but a tarp and the sharp sense that something could go wrong at any moment. That feeling wasn't fear, he said, it was respect. Until the trip that changed everything. It started simple enough. Late October, near Mount Hood National Forest. Cold enough to keep the bugs down, but not so bitter that it would make camping unbearable. Cole had hiked in about 8 miles from the nearest fire road. No cell service. No one around for miles. That's exactly how he liked it. He set up camp near a ridge overlooking a creek, prime spot for elk. He'd scouted the area weeks before and knew the game trails. It was shaping up to be the perfect trip. But on the second night, just before dusk, Cole started to feel watched. The stillness in the woods had shifted. It wasn't the usual hush before nightfall. It was heavier, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. He thought maybe it was a bear. He'd seen signs earlier, scat, claw marks on a pine. So he loaded his rifle and kept it close while he sat by his small fire, just in case. At some point, he must have dozed off. When he woke up, it was fully dark. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and something was off. His rifle was gone. At first, he thought maybe he'd knocked it over in his sleep. Maybe it was just under the tarp, or propped against a tree, and he forgot. But after a minute of searching, he realized it wasn't just misplaced. It was gone. In its place, where he'd laid it just hours earlier, was a note. Old-looking paper, folded neatly, and written in pencil, shaky, almost childlike letters. This is not your place. You took what was not yours. You will not take again. There was no signature, no tracks, no rustling in the woods. Just that note, and a silence so deep it buzzed. Now this is where most people would pack up and get out. But Cole wasn't most people. He had spent years in those woods, and the idea that someone, something, was messing with him on his turf, that didn't sit right. So he waited. He rebuilt the fire, sat with his knife in hand, scanning the darkness. Not for an animal, but for a person. A threat. Someone who'd somehow made it into his camp without a sound. But no one came. The next morning, Cole searched the surrounding area. Still no rifle. No prints. No guirdisterv. Nothing stolen, just the weapon. And that note. He stayed one more night. Maybe out of pride. Maybe out of anger. But whatever he expected, it wasn't what happened next. That third night, he didn't sleep at all. He sat by the fire, eyes heavy but alert. Around 2 a.m., he heard it. Something crunching in the brush about 20 feet beyond the camp. It wasn't walking like a deer. Too deliberate. One slow step. Pause. Another. Cole whispered a warning into the dark. Said he was armed. Said he wouldn't miss. But there was no answer. And then, clear as day, he heard a voice. It didn't sound human. Not entirely. It was like someone imitating a person. Like a child repeating words they didn't understand. It said, "You will not take again." That same phrase. The one from a note. But spoken aloud. With a voice that cracked like branches breaking underwater. Cole didn't wait. He grabbed his pack, left the fire burning, and started hiking out. No flashlight, just moonlight and instinct. He hiked until sunrise, and he didn't stop until he reached his truck, scratched up and shivering. Later, when he told the story, people asked if it was just another hunter, some hermit or forest weirdo trying to scare him off. But here's the thing. Cole went back. A week later, he returned with friends, armed, determined to prove it was just a bad dream or some sick prank. But when they got to the ridge, the campsite was untouched. Except for one thing. His rifle was back, leaning against a tree, clean, undamaged, and wrapped around the barrel was a fresh note. This time, the handwriting was different, smoother, almost elegant. It said, "Last warning, no more," and something else. This part Cole only shared once. He flipped the paper over. There was a charcoal sketch on the back. It showed 3 figures in the trees, watching a man sleep by a fire. The man in the drawing was him. Now, whether you believe Cole or not, there's a chilling detail that lingers. He never hunted again after that trip. Sold his gear, moved out of state, started working in landscaping. Something about staying close to nature, but not in it. He told one friend that the woods didn't belong to us the way we think they do, that we take without asking. And sometimes the forest notices. This story isn't just about a missing rifle. It's about territory, boundaries, and the invisible line between what we think we own and what's merely letting us pass through. Because out there in the wild, where silence has weight and shadows remember you, some things aren't lost. They're taken, and sometimes they give you one chance to walk away. Cole took it. Would you? It was the second week of October when the air began to turn sharp, and the forest took on that eerie silence only hunters recognize. You learn, after enough seasons in the woods, that silence is never natural out there. It's either a predator or something else. Kevin and his older brother Nate had been hunting in the same stretch of Appalachian backcountry since they were kids. A mix of family tradition and obsession. They knew every rise, every path, every hollow that echoed back your own footsteps. This year, they brought something new with them, a brand new motion-sensitive trail cam with night vision and a 48-hour battery, just to see what was really out there when they weren't looking. They set it up near a narrow deer trail where they'd seen fresh tracks the morning before, unusually deep with drag marks along the sides. At first, they thought it was a buck with an injured leg, but the spacing was odd, too wide for a deer, almost like someone had walked on all fours. They left the camera and returned to their base camp about 2 miles off the main trail, planning to check the footage after a full day of hunting. That night, the forest didn't sleep. They kept hearing rustling, not in the distance, but near the perimeter of their camp. Branches cracking softly, a faint chuffing noise, something breathing. Nate swore it was just a curious raccoon or maybe a black bear. Kevin wasn't convinced. He said it felt like being watched, not the usual paranoia. This was different. He described it later like a weight on the back of his neck that never went away. The next morning, they found the camera torn from the tree. Not yanked. Torn. The mounting bracket was still screwed into the bark, but the device had been wrenched off, cracked on one corner, half buried in mud about 30 feet away. Somehow, the SD card was still intact. They drove back into town, plugged the card into Kevin's laptop in their garage, and sat down to go through the footage. At first, everything was normal. Squirrels, owls, a few deer. Then, around 2:13 a.m., the footage changed. The camera triggered, and for the first 10 seconds, the trail was empty. Still. Then, something entered the frame. It didn't walk. It crawled. The thing had the outline of a human, but the limbs were wrong. It moved on all fours, knees and elbows bent like a spider. The arms were too long, dragging through the leaves. The skin was pale, bluish in the night vision. The face was blurred, not by the camera, but like it didn't belong, like the lens rejected it. The thing paused at the center of the frame and slowly lifted its head. It looked directly at the camera. That was when it smiled. But the smile didn't stretch its mouth. It stretched its face, like skin being pulled too tight over a skull that wasn't built to mimic human expression. Then it stood up, its knees bent the wrong way. Elbows cracked as it unfolded. It kept staring. The camera glitched, once then twice, then turned black. The file ended there. No sound, no leaves crunching, no breathing. Just that impossible thing, rising, watching, smiling, and then the feed cut out. Kevin and Nate sat in silence for a long time. They didn't speak, didn't move. Nate was pale. Kevin started shaking, so much so that he knocked the laptop off the table. They told their dad about it the next day. He said something strange. When I was your age, he said, we'd see signs like that. Deep tracks, broken branches, animals vanishing. That's why we never camped overnight. Something in that part of the woods, it isn't ours. Kevin asked him what he meant, but their father just shook his head and muttered, some things don't want to be seen, and some cameras see too much. The story might have ended there, dismissed as faulty night vision or a trick of the shadows, if it wasn't for what happened the next night. Kevin woke up at 3:14 a.m., almost exactly 24 hours after the footage was recorded, to the sound of the motion sensor alert on his phone. The trail cam had been set up again. That wasn't possible. They hadn't returned to the site. The camera had been cracked, maybe even broken entirely. But the phone didn't lie. The alert came from the original location. The coordinates matched exactly. Attached to the notification was a still image. It was the same frame from before, only this time the thing was closer. Much closer. So close that its distorted face filled the entire screen. No movement, no sound, just the same smile. The skin too tight, the eyes wrong, not glowing, just present, aware, staring through the lens. Kevin threw the phone across the room. It smashed against the wall, screen splintered into black. They went back the next morning, against all better judgment. The trail cam was gone. Again, but this time something was left behind. A clawed handprint in the bark of the tree, where the camera had once been mounted. 4 fingers, too long, no thumb, burned into the wood like it had been seared there. There were no tracks leading in or out. No footprints, no disturbed leaves. Just that mark and the heavy silence around it. Kevin and Nate haven't gone hunting since. Sometimes Kevin still gets motion alerts from that trail cam, even though it's gone, even though they never replaced it. He doesn't open them anymore, but they keep coming. Always at 2:13 a.m., always from the same coordinates. And the file size? It gets bigger every time. We thought the cave was nothing more than a curiosity on our hunting trip. Just a dark mouth yawning from the base of a granite ridge, maybe 50 yards off the trail. It wasn't marked on any of our maps, and the opening was almost perfectly round, like something had bored it out, not naturally formed. I remember the air near it. Cold. Still. Too still for that elevation. No wind. No insects. Just silence that felt stretched tight. There were 4 of us. Me, my cousin Tyler, our friend Dean, and his younger brother Marcus. We were hunting elk in the Wyoming backcountry, somewhere near the edge of Shoshone National Forest. This was land that hadn't seen people in weeks, maybe months. We set up camp a mile or so from the cave. That night, over the fire, we started joking about it. Tyler's hole to hell, he called it. But Marcus didn't laugh. He was staring into the dark woods past the firelight, face pale. There's something down there, he said, in that cave. I heard breathing. Dean rolled his eyes. You probably heard yourself wheezing after the hike. But Marcus was insistent. He said when he'd gone to take a leak earlier that evening, he walked closer to the cave entrance. Not into it, just near enough to see the inside vanish into pitch black. He said he felt watched, like something was sitting just out of sight, deep in the dark, waiting. We brushed it off as nerves. Isolation and altitude can do weird things to your head. But around 2 a.m., Tyler woke me up. Do you hear that? He whispered. His breath was visible in the cold air. The fire had died down, and everything was quiet, except a sound like rocks grinding together. Distant but distinct. It was coming from the direction of the cave. We all listened, sitting up in our tents, barely breathing. The noise continued for about a minute. Then, silence again. Dean tried to joke it off in the morning. Said maybe a bear had wandered into the cave and got stuck. But Marcus didn't say a word. He wouldn't even eat breakfast. Just kept staring toward the ridge. Around noon, we decided to go take a closer look. Curiosity got the better of us. It was just a cave, right? The mouth was about 7 feet tall and perfectly round. That wasn't natural. And there were no claw marks, no erosion patterns, no signs of water flow, just smooth, cold stone. We only looked inside from the entrance. Our flashlights barely cut the darkness, as if the beam got swallowed up. Tyler threw a rock inside. We never heard it hit bottom. We agreed to leave it alone. But that night, everything changed. Just after sundown, the woods fell deathly silent. No wind, no birds, no bugs, nothing. And then came the smell. Rot, vet rot, like meat that had been buried and dug up. The air grew thick with it. We covered our noses, gagging. Dean went to check the perimeter, rifle in hand. A minute later, he came sprinting back into camp, eyes wide. "It's out," he said. It came out of the cave. He couldn't explain what he saw, just that it was wrong. Not an animal, not a man. Something tall and crawling low to the ground on too many limbs. Pale skin like raw hide. It didn't move like anything alive. We huddled together in the center of camp, all 4 rifles aimed outward. The fire was roaring, and we were surrounded by a ring of light. But the woods beyond were pitch black. We didn't hear it approach. No twig snapping, no leaves rustling, just breathing, heavy, wet, like it was dragging broken lungs through each inhale. And then came the voice. It didn't sound like any of us. It was trying to be us. "Tyler," it said, but wrong, like someone playing a recording through a broken speaker. We froze. It kept going. "Come here. Come look. I'm cold, Ty." It was using Marcus's voice now. Dean grabbed a flare and launched it. The red light exploded over the trees, and we saw it. A figure about 10 feet tall if it stood upright, hunched and bone-thin, skin clinging to its frame. Its face was stretched into something vaguely human, but the mouth was too wide. The eyes, if they were eyes, were just pits of darkness, and it was dragging something small. It dropped the object at the edge of our light. Marcus screamed. It was his backpack, still zipped shut. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was right beside us. But the pack was covered in claw marks, as if something had pulled it from the tent during the night before, when none of us had noticed. Then it spoke again. Only this time, it used my voice. "Help me," it whispered. "I am hurt. It's dark. Please come." The thing vanished back into the trees before we could fire. Just gone. We didn't sleep that night. At first light, we packed everything and hiked out. The cave was silent again. No smell, no tracks. We told the ranger we'd encountered a bear. Left out the rest. But I did some digging once I got home. That area? The cave isn't listed on any geological survey. Not once. I checked topographic maps from the 1960s onward. It's just not there. But there's a legend buried in the folklore of the Absarca tribes. They speak of something called Kokosita, the crawling hunger, a creature that lives beneath the stone, emerging only when the sun dies down. It mimics. It hunts by voice. And it doesn't kill right away. It waits, sometimes for days. They say it enjoys watching first. The cave? That might not even be a cave. It could be a burrow, a mouth. And we were camped right by its lips. Every now and then, I dream about it. The sound of it crawling. That wet breathing. And always, I wake up just after it whispers my name. And the worst part? Sometimes it doesn't sound like a dream. It started like most hunting trips do. Early mornings, steaming coffee in thermoses, and the smell of pine biting through the cold air. They were 4 friends. Jackson, Cody, Rich, and Evan. Lifelong buddies who had hunted together since they were teens. Every year, they went deeper into the wilderness. This time, they chose a patch of forest in Montana. Remote, vast, and practically untouched. They brought 2 rifles, 1 bow, plenty of supplies, and a 2-way emergency radio for contact. There was no cell service for over 30 miles. The radio was their only tether to the outside world, and, as it turned out, their last link to sanity. The first night passed uneventfully. Stories around the fire, a few beers, nothing strange. But on the second day, Evan wandered farther than usual, hoping to scout for elk signs. When he didn't return by sundown, the group wasn't immediately worried. He was experienced. He had gear. But by midnight, there was still no sign of him. That's when the radio crackled. A faint, broken voice stuttered through. "Cody? It's Evan. Don't come looking." Then static. The group froze. Rich grabbed the radio and tried responding. No answer. Just white noise. They assumed it was a prank at first. Maybe Evan found a signal boost spot and was messing with them. That was his style. But as hours passed, their confidence crumbled. They searched in shifts the next day. No tracks. No sounds. No trace. But that night, the radio came alive again. "He's not Evan anymore. If you hear him again, don't answer." The voice wasn't Evan's. It wasn't anyone's. It sounded wrong, like someone trying to imitate human speech but falling just short. The fear became a thick, wet thing clinging to them. They took turns keeping watch that night. At 2:47 a.m., the forest, usually teeming with insects and distant coyote cries, went deathly silent. Even the wind seemed to die. Then came a knock, on the side of the tent. Not loud, just deliberate. Cody unzipped the flap and shone a flashlight into the dark. Nothing. But right at the edge of the trees, about 30 yards away, was something standing still. Too tall, barely visible. When the light touched it, it turned, slowly, and stepped behind a tree. When morning came, they found footprints circling the tent. Bare feet, human-sized, but the spacing between them suggested legs far longer than any man's. Still no Evan. That evening, Cody insisted on going to the ridge to scan for higher radio signal. Rich and Jackson reluctantly agreed. From the ridge, Cody called out on every channel they had. Silence. Then, "You shouldn't have come up here." The voice again. Mechanical. Offbeat. Then Cody saw movement near the base of the ridge, something crawling. It wasn't Evan. It wasn't anything recognizable. Its limbs bent wrong, but it moved with terrifying speed. They ran, slid down the ridge, stumbled back to camp, packed whatever they could grab in seconds. They started hiking toward the truck, 8 miles away. But the forest twisted. Familiar landmarks vanished. Trees seemed too close. Paths seemed to loop. Then the radio buzzed once more. "I warned you." The voice was closer this time. Clearer. Not through static, like someone whispering just over your shoulder, but still coming through the speaker. And then came something chilling. I remember who I was. I remember the pain. But the forest doesn't let you leave. For the next 48 hours, they tried to escape. No rest. No sleep. The sun barely seemed to rise. Their compasses spun aimlessly. Birds didn't sing. On the third night, Jackson vanished. No scream. No struggle. He was there one moment, then gone. That night, Cody and Rich heard the radio one last time. "Tell my family, I am sorry, but don't come looking. Not for me. Not for Jackson. The forest has us now." It was Evan's voice. But by then, it was clear whatever was speaking used to be Evan. By some miracle or mistake, they eventually stumbled onto a ranger station on the edge of the woods. Disoriented, starving, terrified. When they reported what happened, the rangers listened with stiff faces. One of them simply said, "You're not the first." They tried to trace the radio signals. Found nothing. No evidence of Evan or Jackson. No tracks. No campsite remains. Later, Cody received a box in the mail. No return address. Inside, their old emergency radio. It was off. Batteries removed. But that night, it turned on by itself. And Evan's voice returned. "It's your turn now. Thanks for watching. Comment where you're from. I want to see how far the darkness has spread. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror.